written minutes. When the state of emergency ends, draft minutes from all of the meetings held during the time will be ratified at the next in-person meeting. As a way of ensuring that our meeting goes smoothly, Tim Polid Thomas, RVARC Outreach and Communication Specialist, and Brian Hill, RVARC Regional Planner, will serve as the host and co-host for this meeting. All participants are asked to mute themselves to improve audio quality. If any policy board member wishes to make a motion, second it, or comment on a motion, please unmute yourself and ask to be recognized by me, the chair. Motions will be written and shared on the screen available for all to read before the roll call vote. Comments by citizens will be accepted at the end of the meeting. All right, with that, I will call the meeting to order and ask the secretary to do the roll call.
Mr. Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Clinton?
Here.
Mr. Martin? I think Mr. Martin had a BACO regional meeting today. He had to.
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch?
Here.
Mr. Cobb?
Here.
Mr. Fidgelowski?
Here.
Mr. North?
Here.
Mr. Radford?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Lyles? Ms. Scheid?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Price? Mr. Bradshaw?
Here.
Mr. Sonneklaar? We have a quorum, Madam Chair.
All right, item number 2 on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda items. They consist of approval of this agenda and approval of the May 28th, 2020 minutes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
a couple corrections on page 5 of the minutes.
Okay.
Under item number 4, second paragraph. For clarification, it refers to 2 pre-applications, and it says, since that time, the city of Roanoke and Roanoke County have coordinated with staff. Those 2 projects relate to Roanoke County. Project Carson Road to Hunt Ridge is labeled City of Roanoke. That should be Roanoke County. And Carson Road is misspelled. It should be R-O-A-D. Under the motion paragraph at the bottom of page 5, it should read County of Roanoke's request for 460 intersections. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Mr. North. Do I have a motion to approve the corrected minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Mickey Johnson, second.
Okay. Do we need to do a roll call vote on this, Wayne?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Clinton?
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch?
Yes.
Mr. Cobb?
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Yes.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Scheid? Ms. Scheid?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw?
Yes.
Motion's approved.
All right. Remarks by the chair. I have a couple of remarks I want to make.
Madam Chair, if I could interrupt for just a quick second. We've got a couple of folks that have joined and by phone, and I wanted to see if I could get those folks to identify themselves. Let's see. The number ending in 2392.
That's Lee Osborne.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. And that's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you, Brian. So under Chair's remarks, I have a couple of things I want to share with you. That this meeting will be the last meeting for Jackie Pace, the Regional Commission's office manager. She has decided to retire from the Regional Commission on Friday, July 17th, after 43 years of service with the Commission. Since coming to the Commission in January 1977, she has contributed much to ensuring that the work of the Commission is handled in an efficient and effective manner. She is the first voice you hear when you call the Commission office. The material the TPO receives comes mostly from Jackie's desk. It would be difficult to list all the many things that Jackie is involved with in terms of the TPO and the Regional Commission. I know she will be sorely missed by all TPO board members. Please join me in thanking Jackie for her 43 years of service to the Regional Commission and the work that she has done for the TPO. The staff will prepare a resolution of appreciation and give it to her when it is safe to do so. And I just want to personally say thank you, Jackie. It's an amazing career. You've done an outstanding job. You're always smiling and friendly and helpful. And I personally really appreciate all the help. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scheiden. I just want to say it's been a pleasure to work with everyone for all the many years. I'm going to miss it, but I'm looking forward to what's out there for me next. So I wish all of you the best.
Good. Do the staff a favor and don't move away.
No, I can't move.
I think they're going to be needing you.
Thank
Right.
you all.
I also want to take a moment to recognize one of our policy board members who will be leaving our group at the end of this month. Jane Johnston has served our organization for many years. I want to warmly thank her for her devoted service to the RVTPO. Jane started her tenure on the TPO in 2008. She has assumed several leadership positions, including vice chair and chair. She has also served on a number of committees, including the nominating committee. I wish Jane much luck and success in her next endeavors. And I thank her on behalf of myself and all of the TPO for her dedication and public service. Thank you, Jane, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much for that. It's been an honor to serve with each and every one of you. I have just greatly enjoyed my time working with the Regional Commission and the staff and everyone. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Jane. You've been a big help to me, so I appreciate it. All right, and speaking of Jane, the next item on our agenda is the nominating committee report.
Madam Chair, this is Bill Bestfitch. If I might, before the nominating committee report, I just wanted to take a moment to remind all my fellow TPO board members that this is the last meeting that Janet Scheid will be with us. Janet has been on the TPO board since 2015. And during that time, she served as both the vice chair and the chair. Of course, her many years of service as a local government employee gave her a solid foundation for her work as an elected official. Janet made a smooth transition to chair when she was called to take over when board member Ray Ferris left Roanoke City Council. Janet has worked hard to ensure that the meetings of the TPO move smoothly so the business of the TPO could be handled efficiently. And I'm sure that all TPO board members join me in commending Janet for the job that she has done in her tenure on the board and as chair of the TPO. Thank you, Janet, for all you've done.
Thank you, Bill. Jane, it's been an honor, and it has been a pleasure to serve with all of you. And I can't say enough about the RVARC staff. They've been fabulous to work with.
It's been great working with you too. Thank you for your leadership. And I'll look forward to hopefully seeing you more in private life.
Yep. All right. Then
with that,
turn it over to Jane for the nominating committee report.
all right. Well, as you just heard, Chair Scheid did not seek re-election to Vinton Town Council, and therefore she will unfortunately be no longer eligible to serve as an elected official on our RVTPO policy board effective July 1st. This will also affect the office of the RVTPO chair held by Ms. Scheid. According to the TPO bylaws, the vice chair takes over as chair of the TPO if the chair cannot complete his or her 2-year term. And fortunately for us, Billy Martin, who currently serves as vice chair, is reporting that he'll be happy to serve as the RVTPO chair, filling the unexpired 2-year term, which runs through the conclusion of the September 2021 RVTPO meeting. With Mr. Martin taking over as chair, this will leave a vacancy in the office of the vice chair. At the May meeting of the TPO, Chair Scheid appointed a nominating committee that was composed of myself and Bill Bestpitch from the city of Roanoke to propose nominee to fill the unexpired term for the office of vice chair. So with that said, the nominating committee has met and is recommending the following nominee to serve as vice chair of the RVTPO to fill the remaining 2-year term, which runs through the conclusion of the September 2021 RVTPO meeting. And we are proposing to nominate for the office of vice chair, Phil North from the county of Roanoke.
Thank you for that report, Jane. Are there nominees on the floor? Okay, hearing none, then we will vote on Phil North as vice chair. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we nominate Phil North as vice chair. Mickey Johnson.
Thank you.
Steve Fidzikowski would second.
All right. Did you get that? Second? Yep. Okay. Mr. Secretary, would you please roll?
Yes. Let me get unmuted here. I'm unmuted, I guess. Okay. You might hear some background noise. They're drilling a hole in the basement, so I'll probably be speaking louder, and you may have to speak louder to hear me. Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Clinton.
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch.
Yes.
Mr. Cobb.
Yes.
Mr. Fidzikowski.
Yes.
Mr. North.
Yes.
Mr. Radford.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Ms. Scheid.
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw.
Yes.
I've noticed that Mr. Sonlikar joined us. Mr. Sonlikar.
I say yes.
The motion is approved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both Billy Martin for being willing to move up into the chair position and Mr. North for being willing to serve as vice chair. Thank you both very much. Good luck. All right, number 5 on the agenda is the FY 2021-2024 Transportation Improvement Program, TIP. And I will turn it over to Brian Hill to present that item.
Let's try that again now that I'm muted. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As you saw from last month's first reading, as it were, this month we come back to you with consideration of the draft fiscal year 2021 to 2024 TIP. As we've mentioned before, this is a 4-year capital improvements program for all federal funds that are received in the region. And just wanted to talk just a little bit about how we have gotten to here in terms of the things that you'll see and have seen in the document before you, and the surveys that we've held. So we've had 2 surveys since we've started the process with the TTC back in April. So we had a 15-day public comment period that consisted of 1 online survey with 53 respondents, and then we held a second one in June that lasted from June 3rd to the 18th that yielded an additional 61 respondents, bringing the total to 114. And the results of those public opportunities follow this staff report. And one thing of note is that since we've been administering these surveys, we have had the greatest response rate from the minority communities, specifically the African American community. There's a 8% response rate, and there's an overall 14% proportionality of the region. So we think that's moving in the right direction in terms of our underserved populations and minority populations. Let me just talk a little bit about some of the things that are in the document. The TIP lists the grouped and ungrouped projects that are to be implemented in the period of FY21 to 24, and it gives a definition of the distinction between the two. It gives a project status of March 2020 for all the grouped and ungrouped projects, anything from preliminary engineering to right-of-way acquisition to construction and completion. Talks about the TIPS amendment and adjustment process, talks about various funding processes like STBG and TA, and related documents that are included in the appendices. We've listed a few smart scale projects that are in the other projects category that don't receive federal funding but are of regional significance. I mentioned the public input survey results are included in the appendix, and we've pulled the basic or citizens guide to the TIP and from the appendix, and that will be, when completed following the adoption, we'll place that on our website. So at this point, staff and the TTC both have recommended the TTC at their June 11th meeting, and staff here recommend the adoption of the FY21 to 24 TIP. The resolution of approval follows this staff report, as well as self-certification, which is to be executed by the chair and VDOT and DRPT representatives, which essentially confirms the compliance, the TPO's compliance with federal regulations. That's all I had for this, and we do have a public hearing at this point.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you. Brian's correct. We have a public hearing. I will open the public. Do we have anyone?
Madam Chair, we do not have any. There have been no notifications of public on this call to provide any comments.
All right. If there are no public comments, I will close the public hearing. Our next action is adoption of a resolution approving the FY 2021 to 2024 Transportation Improvement Program.
Madam Chair, I have some comments.
Yes, sir.
On page 22 of the document, there are 4 projects in the county that are listed on there. 2 of the projects have been complete. Route 118 to 221 adaptive traffic signal and the reconstruct Route 688. And then the 2 projects sandwiched between those 2 are projects that are no longer being considered. So I'm just wondering how these four ended up in the staff report, I guess, or is this normal?
Madam Chair, if I can respond, Mr. Radford, one of the common things, and Michael Gray and or Ken King from VDOT can echo what I'm about to say, but that is one of the things that we commonly see is in the process of communicating projects from VDOT to us, we see a variety of different projects that are completed and that say that they're completed. And the reason they remain in the tip is that for some reason or another they've not completely closed out, and that they still remain in the in and on the current 6-year improvement program as a result. So that's why you'll see a variety of different projects that are completed. Most of the time, I've found that in the next cycle, so when we do the 24 to 27 tip, those will drop off, if you will. And if you can give me just a bit more of a description of the other two projects you said that are no longer being pursued.
Yeah, the reconstruction and replace bridge on Route 1662 over Mudlick Creek for $4.4 million roughly, and then right under that, reconstruct. I guess it's same project. It's just got a different title. Reconstruct Route 1663 with drainage related to branch of Mudlick Creek, $687,000.
Madam Chair, if I can ask either Mr. King or Mr. Gray, are you all aware of those projects that are not going forward, and in your opinion, would you suggest we remove those from the document?
This is Michael. Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of those two projects, but we can look into those. It could still be an issue of getting those kind of off of our books, like you mentioned, closing out a project, whether it's been a canceled project or a project that has been completed. Sometimes they stay on our books a little longer just for the kind of the financial closeout period. So I'll check on those two, or really those four, I believe it was, and let you know. But I think at this point, we would just leave them on this document until we know for sure.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Radford, does that answer your questions? It sounds like you think that they're completed, and they are completed, but the book work is not done yet.
I guess I was wondering if Brian and the staff spoken to our staff about those projects.
Gone through the TTC, and your staff is represented there, so I would assume so.
Okay.
To answer Mr. Radford's question, this is the first time I've made aware of it. I have communicated several times with Megan Croneiss, and she's provided several corrections and to various different projects, and haven't seen those in particular.
Okay.
All right. Anything else in terms of the resolution to approve the tip? If not,
Best Pitch, I move the approval of the resolution.
thank you, Mr. Bestfitch. A second?
Second.
Thank you. I think the motion is showing on your screen. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Can you please restate who made the second?
Who made the second?
Mr. North.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. North.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Sonnecar.
Yes.
The motion is approved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Our next action item required on this agenda item is approval of the self-certification statement. It's in your agenda package on page 36 and 37. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that this is just simply certifying that the transportation planning and programming process is being conducted in accordance with all applicable requirements. And so I need a
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
a motion to approve the self-certification statement, and then if there's any discussion, we will have that discussion.
I'll make the motion.
Is that Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Any discussion of the self-certification statement? Not. Do we have a second?
Steve Clinton, second.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton. Any discussion? Mr. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Sonnecar.
Yes.
Sonnecar. The motion is approved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, item number 6 on our agenda is the FY 2021 to 2026 Surface Transportation Block Grant Financial Plan. As you remember, we discussed this in great detail at our last. I'll ask Christina to please present this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the screen, I have the agenda packet that has the staff report that shows the information related to this item. This won't be a lengthy discussion, hopefully, as it was last month. The column on the right shows what the policy board approved in terms of the funding strategy for the next 6 years for STBG funding. You can see the green represents where more money than what was requested is being recommended. And the red recommends less money than what was requested. And then the black is fulfilling the requested amount. And there's also a difference between committed funding, conditional committed funding, and then the hybrid commitment. So let me explain that again. Come down a little bit further to the 6-year financial plan. There, now you can see me. So here's the financial plan, and the items in blue at the bottom are the new projects that were submitted last September that are being added. This financial plan also includes a timing adjustment for the Elizabeth Greenway, which was approved by the TTC earlier this month. That wasn't reflected previously when you made the adjustment to the FY 20 to 25 financial plan last month. So that changes the availability of funding for the new projects. The spreadsheet that I had up just before this one listed the priority of the projects, and that was approved by the board last month. I just want to clarify that the priorities don't necessarily translate into the first priority, second priority, third priority, those ones getting funded before lower priority projects. There's a little bit more strategy that goes into developing this financial plan and when projects would get money. So basically, some of those considerations that went into this financial plan were projects that had higher PE, preliminary engineering costs, and that were waiting for smart scale results, so that are being submitted this coming year for smart scale. Those projects have funding that would begin in FY22, and those are the ones that are shown with the $100,000. 3 projects: Route 220 Super Street, Route 419 Streetscape.
I'm not showing on my screen anymore. Is everyone else?
Can everyone else see the screen? I'm seeing head nods.
Yeah.
Yes, the screen is visible.
I'm not seeing it.
Okay, I'll try and verbally explain things well enough. So 3 projects that have higher preliminary engineering costs and are also applying for construction funding through Smart Scale. So that's the Route 220 Super Street, Route 419 Streetscape, and the Valley Point Parkway realignment. Those ones would start receiving funding in FY22, and then additional funding later in the 6-year program. Projects with smaller preliminary engineering costs, such as the Aviation Drive Valley View Boulevard Pedestrian Improvements Project, which is in the same scenario. They're searching for construction funds through the Smart Scale program, but because they have smaller preliminary engineering costs, that's programmed earlier. Or projects that the TPO will be funding in full. Those projects would begin sooner in this 6-year program. Then there's also the question about commitment. So there's an additional column that's been added here. You can see at the top, there's a column that says additional conditionally committed funding and then committed funding recommended. The first column is new. So 4 projects fall into that category of having additional conditionally committed funding. Those projects are seeking the funds through the Smart Scale program to fulfill their total funding needs. The amount that's being committed by the TPO would pay for preliminary engineering and right-of-way for the Route 220 Super Street project, and then preliminary engineering and right-of-way for the Aviation Drive Valley View Boulevard Parkway, Valley View Boulevard Pedestrian Improvements Project. It would not pay for construction, so that construction amount would depend on Smart Scale. Preliminary engineering would be covered by the TPO through this STBG program for Route 419 Streetscape and Valley Point Parkway. So those are the committed amounts. The conditionally committed amounts would help pay for right-of-way or construction funding. So that's a little bit different, but just to clarify that the TPO is on the hook for a portion of the project regardless of how that project fares in Smart Scale. So we had sought public input on the new candidate projects, and that information was shared with the board last month. We also advertised for a public hearing, and that's to take place now at this meeting prior to consideration of the resolution to approve this STBG 6-year financial plan. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, are there any questions for Mrs. Fitch before we open up the public hearing? All right, then I will open the public hearing. Do we have anyone signed up for comment, Brian?
All right, let's take a quick look here. No, ma'am, we do not.
All right, then I will close the public hearing. We have an adoption of a resolution to adopt approving the FY21 to 26 STBG financial plan. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved. Jane Johnson.
Thank you. There, second.
Second.
I'll second.
And who was that?
Mickey Johnson. That would be Mr. and Mrs. Johnson making the motion and second.
Thank you, Johnson. All right, if there's no other discussion on this resolution, I will ask the secretary to take a roll call vote.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Sonnecker.
Yes.
Motion passes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, we also need to adopt a resolution approving the conditional commitment of FY 2027 STBG funds to Route 460 projects. Mrs. Finch.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Also, last month, the board considered 5 out-of-cycle requests related to Route 460 and the operational improvement study that's still ongoing. These projects are requesting 20% of the total estimated cost that would help bring down that total request through Smart Scale. And last month, the board indicated a preference to allocate FY 2027 funds ahead of schedule. And you also requested public input on these projects. And so we did put out a survey and we received 168 comments. 168 people took the survey. And in general, the feedback was favorable to applying STBG funds to leverage these smart scale applications. And I can show this table here. The blue is in favor, and then the greens are either not sure or not in favor. So this is assumed that the FY27 funds available through the STBG program would be the same as FY26. We don't know yet how much money would be available in FY27, but in order for the projects to be submitted through the Smart Scale application process with the amount that they'll be needed to ask, we need to know today if the board is supportive of applying what is anticipated for FY27 for these projects. So there is no public hearing at this point because this is prior to when the board would normally consider using FY27 funds, which would normally be next spring. So the resolution is to conditionally commit funds as requested for the Route 460 projects. And there's a resolution in the agenda packet to that effect.
All right, thank you. We need to adopt this resolution approving the conditional commitment of funds for the 460 projects. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Bill Bestfitch. I move approval of the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I would make the second for that, Steve Fidgelowski.
All right, we have a motion to approve the resolution. We have a second. If there's no further discussion, I will ask the secretary to take a roll call vote.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Sonnecker.
Yes.
Motion is approved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, moving right along, we're down to number 8 on our agenda, which is the Interstate 81 lighting at major interchanges in Virginia's Blue Ridge. Some of you may recall that this item has been postponed from several months ago, but I think we are ready to hear it. And I'm going to ask Mr. King of VDOT to give us a briefing. and then we will consider a resolution on this item. And just as a reminder, we have a bit more business to take care of after, so we need to move this along as quickly as we can. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
And
Yes.
All right. Advance the slides 2, if you will. This is the 6 interchanges are the ones that were referenced in the resolution that has been drafted for the TPO to eventually take action on. And so it goes from Wildwood Road out towards Salem all the way through to exit 150 and the interchanges that are through that segment. Real briefly going to provide you with an overview of the evaluation work that's been done thus far. The technical evaluation criteria really comes from 3 sources. The AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. It's a roadway lighting design guide that really looks at freeway related items, that assesses really focusing predominantly on the average annual daily traffic. That's the AADT reference you see there for both the ramp, the crossroad, and the interstate segment itself. The US DOT's roadway lighting handbook incorporates some items that we used, which really looks at the ratio of nighttime to daytime crash rates as being one of the items that tries to drive to the safety considerations of lighting. And then lastly, VDOT has some design guidance documents that predominantly look at avoidance of excessive light, and which I guess you would refer to as light pollution, as well as looking at using low energy types of lighting, such as our new LED lighting that has become more of our standard. So there's some other design guidance items there as it relates to the type of the lighting structure itself. So your standard street light you see on most city streets is often referred to as a cobra head due to its shape light, but it's a relatively low luminaire. Then you'll have other lightings that are oftentimes referred to as high mast lighting as one particular example. And those are on a very, very high or tall mast, and those would be similar to what you see at the truck scales right now. So we are certainly in our design guidance documents, we're moving toward LED related lighting and also trying to be lower scale, more targeted to light the specific area of concern without providing excessive light that has the negative impacts associated with that. So we've looked at this criteria. If you go to the next slide, from that criteria, we identified that it does meet, there's 2 sort of criteria points. One is whether or not the lights are, quote, warranted. And similar to a traffic signal, you meet certain minimum warrants, and then there's a justification study to really then do an engineering evaluation of what is the most appropriate decision as to where the lights should be applied, taking into consideration many of the factors I just explained. So in the first criteria above, you'll see the current ADT ramp traffic entering and leaving the freeway. It references thresholds for urban, suburban, and rural. In our case, we're urban, but we're well above, the connecting route volumes are well above what the minimum thresholds would be. Also, the ADT on the freeway itself, Interstate 81, is well above those urban thresholds listed. So we're certainly beyond what would be the minimum warranting criteria. We did not have in this next area this statewide average for interchanges in terms of a crash rate that is for unlit, unlit similar interchanges. We just did not have that as a reference in our state information. So we elected to use a different value shown on the next slide, if you will, which looks at the ratio of crashes from day to night. And so you can see the 6 interchanges shown. Exits 137 is Wildwood Road. Exit 140 is there at 311 as the entrance into Roanoke College area. Exit 141 is the connection with Route 419. Exit 143 is the freeway to freeway interchange, and I'll talk more specifically about this freeway to freeway connection of Interstate 581 and Interstate 81. Exit 146 is Plantation Road, the exit you would use to get to Hollins College, and then finally exit 150 over on the Botetourt end beyond the scale area. So you can see shown here the ratio of night to daytime crash rate as well as the night to daytime injury rate. Exit 143 is the one that really kind of stands out, and I'll talk more about the fact that that is the one area that from a need perspective is the most needed in terms of lighting. Interestingly, we were a little bit surprised, not necessarily expecting to see exit 146 have the standout that it did in terms of a ratio. So we do have a fair number of nighttime crashes there at the Plantation Road exit. So, but in this case, one of the criteria that they look for is certainly anything that has a greater than a 2.0 is certainly advisable to consider the inclusion of lighting, although it doesn't have to reach that 2.0 level to be supported in that regard. So, next slide, I'll show you the we've sketched out the areas that, based on looking at the operations as well as safety and the existing traffic volumes, we have provided these sketches to see the area where the engineering justification study recommends lighting. And in this case, you'll notice that each of the ramps here at 581 and 81 are shown as in highlighted yellow that we would try to illuminate, or we would illuminate the roadway through those areas. I will make note that in this particular case, because the freeway-to-freeway interchange is a left entrance and exit, which is a non-standard design. It's not a typical or expected thing on the highway. We have been fortunate through the years in that I think traffic typically gets in the right lane when they're traveling slower. The traffic that gets in the left lane to exit, say if you were headed 81 southbound, they'll get in that left lane to take the exit to come downtown toward the city of Roanoke, and they'll slow down. So we've got a natural metering of speeds because we only have 2 lanes. When that gets widened and we have a center lane, we do expect that we're going to pick up a greater speed differential of traffic. Traffic in the right lane driving slow, traffic in the left lane that's preparing to exit driving slower, but the center lane will be unimpeded at that point. So people that are headed for destinations further south will likely uptick in their speeds a little bit. So we're certainly concerned about how that might play from a safety perspective in the future. And so in this particular interchange area, the recommended condition is to light the ramp as well as the main road that connects between the entrance and exit ramps. So to the next slide, I'll show another interchange. Here at Wildwood Road of exit 137, we have some existing lighting that's shown in blue. And the engineering study identified the recommendation for lighting the ramps, both the exit and entrance ramps in both directions, as well as the cross-connecting street. One of the factors of the cross-connecting street and the ramp termini is the presence of pedestrians. And certainly that is one of pedestrian and bicycle and other vulnerable road users at nighttime conditions can be very exposed. And as you know, any accident that involves pedestrian or bicyclist tends to be among the most severe of our crashes. So this is one that we often will address bicycle and pedestrian related safety measures in a systemic way. So in other words, leaning forward and not necessarily waiting or relying upon a history of crashes, but being a little more proactive, identifying areas that we know that can be accident prone. So that's a big part of the justification for lighting in these situations. So that's the Wildwood Road interchange. The next graphic, if you'll advance the slides, will show us exit 140 at Thompson Memorial Drive. You can see in the top, the park and ride lot. There is some very small amount of lighting in that area where the crossing points go across those ramps near the park and ride lot. And then further down on Thompson Memorial headed into the city of Salem, there's lighting. The illuminated yellow shows the ramp areas and weave and merge areas along 81, as well as underneath the 81 bridge deck there. All of that area in illuminated yellow is the engineering justification recommendation for lighting. The next interchange at 141 at 419, it'll show us again, you got some pretty lengthy merge areas that are shown here, especially as you look in the I-81 southbound direction. But that is the area that's been identified for recommended lighting. As we cross structures like the one shown here, and also on some of our cross street structures, those will be some things that we have to find all the details on once we get into the final design. because establishing the appropriate luminaire and the connection points, as well as the conduits, there's a lot of design work that'll go into lighting in and around these existing structures. So we've identified the area to be lit, and there's very likely to be some detailed design considerations as to how that lighting can be achieved. But again, the approach is for lower level Cobra head type luminaire using LED heads to target the light to the specific area and minimize the light spread to adjoining properties. Next slide will take us to jumping over what we've already seen at the 581 interchange. This takes us up to the Plantation Road exit. And again, you're seeing the same pattern of lighting the ramps and also lighting the cross street. I did talk with Landon Howard earlier this week, and was actually looking for Landon. He has shared some information in the past about the economic activity that lighting can increase based on lighting, the economic activity around the interchange areas. And he was going to try to get some information for me. I didn't receive anything that was that showed any kind of definitive study, but certainly Mr. Howard has shared that that is the experience that he had in Tennessee when he was worked with this issue with the Tennessee DOT. And this is exactly the type of lighting pattern Landon had said that they used in Tennessee and found so successful with illuminating the path for motorists to connect to some of the economic opportunities around these interchanges. So again, lighting the ramps and the cross street. The next and final interchange is at exit 150, certainly a much larger area overall. We do have some lighting already in place at the recent improvement areas at the roundabout there at Gateway Crossing and the intersection at 220 alternate and Route 11. The illuminated yellow areas shows the remaining ramp areas that would be lit, again with relatively frequently spaced, Cobra head type street lighting. The next slide will take us to sort of some details. I've already talked about the primary preliminary way to which we would rely upon the luminaires to be mounted, which would be on the lower profile Cobra head type poles with using light emitting diode technology that certainly reduces energy cost, as well as provides it's a little whiter and a little bit more targeted light with less light spread. And then the challenges that I mentioned on some of the cross streets here at exit 141 and 146, again, it gets back to some of these details of the design of how we work within the existing structures that are there. Only letting folks know that we're not going to be rebuilding a lot, so we're going to have to work with what infrastructure that's there. So the spacing of lighting may have to be modified or some other adjustments, but we will achieve the predominant illumination areas that's been displayed. The estimated cost per interchange are shown, and so you're in the $1.5 to $2 million, 2.5 if you go out to exit 150, which we have such a large footprint on. And the way these would be implemented would be a part, this includes the PE construction and any type of contingency. I would really expect these numbers to come down slightly because we're planning, if we do proceed with the installation of this lighting, it would be a part of the 2 widening projects. We have Interstate 81 widening from the 419 interchange back through Wildwood. It would be one series of interchanges that would be lit with the widening of that portion of 81, and then the portion that picks up at the 581 interchange and goes out to exit 150 would be in the next project. Being a part of these approximately $300 million large scale projects, I would anticipate the actual unit value on these costs, these lighting, to actually come down a little bit. So we hope to find a little better pricing than what's been estimated here, as these were estimated as what could be standalone projects, but we would certainly plan to incorporate them in with the larger project. On the next slide is just some next steps. I will say the inclusion of this lighting in with the 2 widening projects, I do expect to be done administratively. So it would be something that our VDOT staff, concurrence from my central office leadership, or I say our Salem District Central Office leadership, as well as myself, working to incorporate these into the project. Don't anticipate it going to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. However, we certainly keep our Commonwealth Transportation Board representative is informed, and I have talked to Dr. Smoot about this issue. And certainly our VDOT leadership, as well as Dr. Smoot, we're very much encouraging that we seek public input and inclusion of comments from the public in this consideration of adding lighting improvements as a part of the 81 widening improvements. I think that we are certainly well poised to have dialogue with the public. The concerns that are most common is the issue of light spread. I've made several comments about the design considerations that are already at play and how that is being taken into consideration. And so there is 2 points of public input opportunities. One would be now, it's sort of the planning and programming of these improvements. The other would certainly be as a part of the overall construction project itself. Once we have the design details, then we would be in a position to answer questions of adjoining property owners, like, where are sound walls, whether trees are going to be cut down or not. But until the roadway design is complete, knowing exactly where the impacts of the various improvements are is not known at this time. So at this stage, it would be input to let folks know the consideration is being made for lighting to address the safety and other opportunities that the light provides. So the proposal would be for us to work with the TPO and engage the public and come back to the TPO board at a future meeting to provide a brief of what public input and comments were received and how that dialogue took place. And then guided by that public input, the TPO board to take action on the lighting request at that time. So that would line up with Dr. Smoot, as well as my central office leadership's desires that we have that the TPO board's action be guided by that public input process prior to taking official action. The next slide represents the cost of the overall project that I made reference to and how the lighting improvements would be incorporated. You can see the exit 143 to 150 is an estimated $322 million project. And the exit 137 to 141 is a $292 million project. And then you can see the portion that would be added to cover the lighting is 6.6 and $5.4 million respectively. So relative to the overall project, a small addition of scope, and one that I do anticipate that based upon the warranting criteria as well as the results of the justification study is one that the department can support, provided we don't learn something through the public involvement process that would cause new considerations to move in a different direction. So that's the presentation, and I'll hand it back to Ms. Scheid and be glad to answer questions about the information I've shared.
Thank you, Mr. King. Could we go back to the slide where you talked about the next steps?
Yeah, these next steps, as we work back through the slides here, were ones that were put together from the VDOT staff recommendation based on the comments from Dr. Smoot, as well as our commissioner's office. To go to the previous slide, if you would, please. The person driving the slide, yeah.
And are you looking for the VDOT to hold a joint public hearing, public input session on this lighting proposal? Is that what you're looking for? I was understanding that VDOT would hold some type of public input hearing.
So for the request, to make the request to VDOT to include lighting, the recommendation here is that the TPO, and certainly VDOT will work with the TPO staff and support in any way possible or any way necessary, to request and seek public input and comment into the proposal that's before the board to consider of asking that lighting be included in the widening project. So that part would be a public involvement process of the TPO done in partnership with VDOT. Later, when we actually get to the construction itself, once we've completed the design and we have all the design details, we always have a public hearing on our projects, our large-scale construction projects that takes place prior to construction that has then the remaining details of the points I were making about where sound walls are and where trees are going to be removed or left in place. And that would be a public involvement process that would take place just before construction. But the recommendation here is that prior to the TPO board taking action on this lighting request and passing that request on to VDOT, that the board first work with TPO staff as well as VDOT support staff to seek public comment and input, consider that public comment and input, and then, based on that, take an action that would then request the inclusion of the lighting. And at that point, I would work with our central office administrative leadership as well as Dr. Smoot, and that this would likely be included in the project plans for delivery as an administrative addition to the scope of the project.
Okay. Do you see that first step? Do you see that being something that's conducted online, some type of a survey, or do you see it being an actual public meeting?
There is no legal requirement for it to have to be a public hearing per se and meet all the legal requirements of a public hearing, and nor would we encourage necessarily trying to have a in-person face-to-face meeting with folks because of the obvious challenges that we have now with COVID virus among us. But certainly doing something through electronic means of sharing this information. I know the city of Salem has already, as many of you know, has taken action, as has the Botetourt County. So certainly receiving comments from either the administrative representatives of our localities, or if others are planning to take action to pass resolutions to support, those could be other things that could be sought by the TPO to get input from the appropriate interested parties. We could certainly reach out to the adjoining property owners and make them aware of the considerations, and just hear and engage the comment process about this potential inclusion.
So is it possible then, prior to seeking that public input, to have maps or graphics that show not just where the light poles are going to be, but where the light is going to be, so that adjoining property owners have a good sense of whether or not the light pollution is going to spill over onto their properties?
Yeah, I've got Ann Booker, who is in our traffic engineering area, who's been supporting the technical work and performed a lot of the engineering justification work, has joined us, and I asked her to join us for technical related questions similar to this. I don't think that we at this stage, but I'm going to defer to Ann to speak here in just a second to confirm, have sufficient design detail to be able to display exactly where the limits of that lighting would be expected to be. But what we certainly could do is, answer questions and provide information of areas that are already lit. For instance, I gave in those sketches a number of areas where shaded in blue were lighting that was already on the connector street. And you folks could look at the lighting that's there as you come off of, for instance, Wildwood Road into the city of Salem. It would be very similar lighting that would likely have a similar light pattern spread. But I don't think we've got enough information to be able to model the light spread. But Ann Booker, could you speak to that question maybe with a little bit more technical accuracy?
Sure. No, you are correct that we have not, because we have not done a detailed design of the placement of the individual lights. I don't have a graphic or details that would show exactly that light spread. Everything we've estimated has been more based on the typical spacing of light. So there is some additional detail that would be worked through if this moves forward to a design phase. But as an alternate, maybe what we could do is almost provide a worst case scenario if that was needed. We know that the lighting will be placed along the ramp. The intention obviously is to light the ramps themselves and to light the crossroads. So I think you could make an assumption that, if we're going to stay within, say, the projected limits of right-of-way with the placement of the light, then you could, offset perhaps to where you would expect that light spread to be as a worst case scenario. That may be something that we can do, but that has not been done thus far.
Okay, personally, and obviously this is my last meeting, but personally, I think you need to have some of that information prior to going out to public input. Otherwise, the public doesn't know what they're reacting to, or how it's going to impact them. So I think waiting and having that information once you've already decided you're going to do this And once you've, you know, gotten the TPO support for it and things like that, I don't think is useful personally.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Bill North here. I like the idea of getting the input as well. And while I understand the details are not yet sketched out or provided, what Ken just provided to us in terms of those charts per each exit that shows the areas that's now lit and the area that's going to be lit might be helpful if within the next month or two, depending on whether we meet in July or August, to get that out to the public as a survey, much like we did on 460, and let's see what the reaction is. And I'd like to make a proposal that we amend our, well, we don't need to amend it necessarily because we already asked for public input in the resolution, but I think we should make a motion to seek that public input in the form I just mentioned, and then consider the resolution at either July or August meeting when the data is returned.
Okay, Mr. North, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for. Are you saying that the maps that Ken provided of, you know, where the light poles are going to be is sufficient?
Well, for the time being, nobody knows exactly the details other than the fact they're going to light up the ramps and the exit ramps and the on ramps. But I think that the public today, especially along that interstate highway, needs to at least know that this is being considered and provide us with their comments before we, the TPO, adopt this resolution.
And I guess what I'm saying is that I think they need to have the information on where the light is going to spill over to, not just where the light poles are located, so that you know what the impact is. I mean, obviously some of these exit ramps or some of these interchanges have houses very close to them, backup right of way.
That's correct. And many of them have that in case the Hollins District area up near 149, as well as some in the Catawba area.
And Chair Scheid and Mr. North, I would concur with both of you. Being in Salem, I'm well aware that we have a lot of residential right off the interstate and would like as much information to go to those citizens as possible, you know, prior to. So I agree with what you both said.
And I also want to chime in. As a real estate developer, I know exactly what Janet is asking, and that is where that light is going to throw and how much it spreads. We have to do it for developers, especially if we're trying to rezone property. We have to be cognizant of light pollution. So I think that's important, and there's no reason why we couldn't get that from VDOT.
Is there any other discussion at this time? And Mr. King, I'm assuming that we are not going to seek approval of this resolution at this point in time, or you want to get some public input prior to the TPO giving you a green light on this?
That was certainly the requested kind of process from my central office leadership and Dr. Smoot, just in the fact that if we're going to move forward with looking to include lighting as a part of the overall project improvements, and that wasn't in some of the public meetings we had earlier about the 81 improvements, that it would be good to have a public input step here. I will say that we will at some point certainly be able to do something very similar to what Mr. Radford referenced about trying to show light spread and the like, but certainly that usually comes after you've got a design and you know what trees are being taken out, where the footprint of the bottom of the slope is going to be, of the roadway widening. All of those details are not known at this point in time. So we would not be able to show this projected light spread until later in the design phase. But certainly there's a lot of answers even on the slide that's there, and that we're not trying to light all of the continuous freeway of 81 through from point A to point B. We're not using high mass lighting, is not being proposed. So there is a lot to be informed of people that would have questions even at this preliminary stage.
All right.
But that is the process that's being recommended.
Thank you. So at this point, have you gotten what you need from us today?
I have. the board has. So I want to make sure I answer any questions, and if people are comfortable with moving with that step, we will certainly work with TPO staff to support a public input phase, and then visit back in August, or what schedule is appropriate, August, September. I know we don't have a meeting planned for July of the TPO board, so we will work with the TPO staff to support that process.
Thank you. So does any of the TPO members have any other questions or comments about this before we move on to the next item? All right, thank you all. And thank you, Mr. King, for that presentation. Item number 9 on our agenda is presentations on transportation impacts from COVID-19. And I believe we have representatives here from VDOT, Valley Metro, and the airport to discuss this. Is that correct? Those three, am I missing anyone?
Chair Scheid, this is Christina Finch. We also have Rachel Rulin from the commission, who will be able to share bicycle and pedestrian impacts, as well as Nathan Sanford from Radar.
Okay, thank you. It is now 2:15. We have absolutely got to be off this Zoom meeting by 2:45 so that staff can prepare for the regional commission at 3 o'clock. So I appreciate all of you being here to discuss this important topic, but I would ask you each to hold your comments to about 5 minutes each. So can we go ahead and start with airport?
Hello, folks. This is Tim Bradshaw. You can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thought we'd start off with a bit of good news here. As you see on the slide there, that is commercial aviation since the 1950s. And although we've had setbacks through the years, we will bounce back. You can see those dips in the traffic where 9/11, the Great Recession. So we feel like traffic will rebound. Industry experts are expecting maybe 2 to 3 years for us to bounce back completely. If you don't mind advancing the next slide, please. This chart here just shows you a week prior to the pandemic. This was in February. The green line the green bars represent the years and the blue the number of seats, and the blue line represents the frequency of flights. Before the pandemic, we were at about 157 flights. We're slowly creeping back up. We hope to have 91 flights starting in July 1st. But as you can see by this graph here, we've been the last 5 years have been great growth for the airport. Although we didn't see new destinations, we did see a lot more seats, a lot more frequency in the market, and that drives price just as much as anything. Next slide, please. Again, a picture of the good old days, as we like to refer to them. If you look at the red lines on the graph, that represents the current fiscal year for us, which starts in July. We bottomed out in April with 917 passengers, but we're starting to see the uptick here. As a matter of fact, we saw 400 passengers just yesterday. Majority of these travelers are leisure travelers because a lot of companies have not released their travel restrictions on people. So the majority of the travel we've seen is leisure travel, but it is trending in a positive direction. Next slide, please. This is what we call the swoosh. This is all the airports in the United States. This is showing the growth that's coming since April, when we were in the heat of the pandemic. So all the airports are seeing an uptick in their numbers. The national average now is about 15 to 20% of former traffic. And we are pleased at Roanoke that we are trending a little bit above the national average. And I know that for the years, people have complained about the high airfares out of Roanoke, but the airlines like the high airfares. We have a very strong business market, so that bodes well in our favor. Next slide, please. So with the pandemic, here's some of the impacts that we're seeing on the air travel here. Give me just a second. Let me grab my notes. Okay. So in our industry, it's usually the first to go and the last to recover. Whenever there's something like this, it happens. Again, I mentioned earlier, we expect a 2 to 3 year recovery. I'm repeating the fact that we are about 15 to 20% of our last year's levels. We look at TSA screening numbers across the country, and ROA is at or above the national passenger traffic numbers. As I mentioned earlier, we averaged 157 flights a week. Now we're at 91. We're down 58% in total. We're still Airports and airlines are still trying to sort through what it's going to look like as far as CDC measures. It's very hard to social distance yourself on an airplane. They're running about 65% loads on the airplanes now with some separation of seats, but airlines and airports aren't designed for social distancing. But our airlines are requiring passengers to wear a mask. We have masks available to help people as well too. The one thing to keep in mind as we come out of this is that, again, the airlines are going to be shrinking their network. They're moving to larger planes. They're only going to stay in the markets that are profitable. So that's why it's more important than ever that we support our local airports and fly there as much as we can instead of driving to neighboring airports, because it'll help our economic recovery as well. We were very fortunate to receive $20.7 million in CARES funding. We were the third highest airport in the state behind Reagan and Dulles. They actually rewarded airports who had good fiscal management. We have a high cash reserve and we have no debt service. But the funds can be used to cover our operating expenses, our loss of revenue, and capital projects. We will continue to move with our master plan. We will see a dip for a couple of years, but we are still planning on growth and moving forward. We are about halfway through our master plan. We'll be having some public workshops again here soon to present some of the findings and the alternatives for the master plan. Again, as I mentioned, coming out of this, it's more important than ever that we fly Roanoke, fly local, because the airlines are going to be shrinking their network. So I encourage all of you, whenever you can, to fly local. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much. That's interesting information, and it looks somewhat optimistic. All right.
Yes,
Were there any comments or questions on the previous presentation?
Ms. Scheid, Chairwoman Scheid, this is Joe Cobb. I had to travel recently to go and be with my dad during his dying process. And I just wanted to commend Tim and the staff at Roanoke Blacksburg Regional Airport. The signage was excellent. Everyone honored physical distancing. The security process was very thorough and simple. Even the gate agents, everyone was top notch. I felt very safe being there. And even though I had to traverse 3 different airports twice, Roanoke by far was the best. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Cobb. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb, and I'm sorry for your loss. All right, VDOT.
All right, this is Michael Gray. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there's a couple slides there we provided to the technical committee. Actually, there's 3 that deal with just our area, 81, 581, and Route 418. But I wanted to touch base a little bit on not only those, but some things kind of statewide. We had a presentation this month, actually the 17th, to the CTB. And if you want to access that for more information, you can look at their website. But around the state, we have about 512 continuous count stations that will allow us to track this information and see what's happening on a minute by minute basis, basically. And also statewide, we have about 20,000 48-hour count locations, and those are collected on a 3-year rotation. So that gives us information that's not necessarily helping us look at this downturn, but will, in some instances, give us something to compare to. The traffic, as I think everyone knows, was impacted directly from the state of emergency back in March, and the other actions that the governor put out that kept folks at home, closed the schools, traffic, just like the airport, went down significantly. We started getting questions right away about how traffic was going down, how long it would be down, when it would be back up, what were the impacts on speed and incidents and accidents and things like that. We even went as far as having some more internal discussions related to how we deliver projects, and does this downturn in traffic volumes give us any opportunity to deliver a project quicker by maybe extending work hours and working with our contractors. Those traffic, as you can see in front of you, the traffic volumes, as you can see, they're decreasing. The red you see in front of you is a 4-year average from 2016 to 2019, and the blue on all of these is the 2020 traffic. That's a very similar trend statewide and really countrywide, but each district in each area of the state's a little bit different. For the Salem district, our non-interstate roads really showed less of a decrease than our interstate roads did through this kind of April and May period. And then say Nova up in Northern Virginia, they really had more of a difference between their rural and urban roads, where their urban roads showed more of a decrease than their urban roads did. Even their urban not interstate roads showed more of a decrease. So there is differences statewide, but the trend overall is there's been a significant decrease. We're starting to see some uptick in travel. But we don't know what that's going to bring us. We don't know if, areas like South Carolina, we're going to have something like that happen here where we have a resurgence that may push, travel back down a little bit. We just don't know that. But one thing to look at in these daily trends these trends that you're seeing in front of you here, and you can flip through those if you like at whatever pace, because I'm not really talking to each specific slide, but you can kind of look at those and the trend of traffic being low in the mornings, rising during the day, and then coming back down in the evening. That stayed true all through here, but you can see there's slight differences in those peak periods in particular and how far those peak periods went up. So we'll be monitoring those to see if they're going to be back to a normal state anytime soon, or when they do get back to that, or are there going to be changes that stay with us for a longer period of time. Like I said, right now, the trend is going back up towards normal, but it's not there. We're still probably 20% down in a lot of the state, 20% or over in a lot of the state. Sometimes that's fluctuating back up and down a little bit, but the truck traffic in general has not been impacted to the same extent as your overall vehicles have. So our truck traffic towards the end of May, in some parts of the state, that truck traffic was starting to inch back up closer to normal, whereas other parts of the state truck traffic may have been, 5 or 10 or even 15% below the normal. But in general, kind of statewide at the end of May, we were 20% or over in a lot of the traffic around the state. So, what does that bring for our future? We don't really, know at this point. We're tracking it. Is it going to have an impact on a work environment like us? The ability for us to deliver projects are people going to start teleworking more? We don't know that, but that's one of the discussions we're having within VDOT, and a lot of other companies are having those discussions as well. With those decreases in volume, as you could probably expect, with less people on the road, people that are traveling have a tendency to go faster. So we've seen an increase in our overall speeds throughout the state. And with that, we've also seen a rise in the number of speed-related crashes and also speed-related fatalities. So over the past 15 years, speed-related crashes make up about 19% of the overall crashes, and during this period, it's more like 23%. And for fatalities, over a 5-year period, a 5-year running average, it's about 41% of speed-related crashes. Fatalities are related to speed. And during this period, it's been up a little bit to 48%. So you can see that, while we're having less traffic, less people on the road, speeds are increasing a little bit. And also the speed-related crashes and fatalities have gone up just a little bit. Incidents and breakdowns, like police activity, congestion, breakdowns, incidents and accidents, they've followed the same pattern as our traffic volumes. They've gone down. As you can probably guess, if there's less cars out there, we're probably going to have less police activity, less congestion, less breakdowns. But the one thing we have seen since the traffic has started to inch back up, we've seen the incidents in particular inch back up with it. So we're continuing to monitor that statewide, and we'll continue to do so. This information that's provided to you, we only provided it through, I think, right there at the very beginning of June. We'll be glad to, come back at a later date and provide you more information that gives you, adds another month or more to it whenever y'all want that information. But in general, you can see in our area with the 419, the 581, and the 81 graphs that I provided, that is a very similar trend. It's going down and it's starting to inch back up. I think at this point, we really couldn't tell you when it's going to be back to normal, if it's going to be back to normal, or what that brings, but we can show you that it's starting to inch back up. So that concludes my remarks, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Any quick, brief questions for Michael? Okay, hearing none.
Hi, this is Dorian Allen. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so Valley Metro has implemented a number of practices to protect our passengers and transit operators while still trying to continue to provide services to the area. Of course, the safety of our passengers and staff members have been our top priority during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we wanted to ensure a safe environment for our bus operators. That includes creating a separation between passengers and drivers in accordance to the 6-foot social distancing rule. In doing so, the front seats of all of our buses are closed to provide for social distancing between passengers and bus operators. Additionally, a safe environment for drivers also included eliminating hand-to-hand transactions between passengers and drivers. So in doing so, on March 27th, the collection of fares was suspended to eliminate passengers stopping at the fare box. The suspension of the fare collection will expire this month. Just for references. Additionally, on April 9th, we limited the number of passengers to 9 passengers per bus. And this will increase to a limit of 15 passengers next month, starting, I believe, July 1st, in adherence to social distancing guidelines. Transit passengers are required to exit the bus from the rear doors. This is done to decrease interactions and increase physical distancing between passengers boarding and deboarding the buses. We've also implemented signage throughout the buses to encourage behaviors as described by the CDC, including physical distancing, properly covering mouths when coughing, and wearing masks. We highly recommend that our passengers wear masks. However, we don't enforce it. We don't enforce passengers to wear masks for a number of reasons, including health reasons and so forth. In-house, we've been providing the necessary personal protective equipment to our staff, and we've also enhanced cleaning the buses at night, including at night during operation hours. This includes hiring extra cleaners to work after hours and during hours. We have implemented a number of changes to our policy, but we're still enforcing the CDC guidelines. So effective on July 1st, Valley Metro will resume collecting transit fares on all Valley Metro transit services. In addition, the Valley Metro admin building will be open to the public effective July 6th. We will continue to observe the social distancing practices while providing transit services. This includes the use of face coverings and masks that being required or being recommended for our public transportation. Still enabling social distancing guidelines between our bus drivers and our passengers. We'll be increasing the limit to 15 passengers per bus and providing extra buses placed in service to handle overcapacity issues when available. Transit passengers are still required to exit the bus from the rear. Transit passengers are encouraged to limit contact with bus operators. And we still are implementing signage on the buses that encourages behaviors as described by the CDC. Next slide, please. Yeah, we got, well, right here, that's fine. We've been awarded $9.2 million from the CARES Act funding. $8.1 million of that will be for fixed route services, with an additional $1.1 million for commuter services. This funding will be used for planning, operating, and capital expenses, and will be programmed during the FY20 to FY21 fiscal years. And just briefly about our ridership. As you can see, in December, we were actually seeing upticks in ridership, but as you can see, mainly in the months of March, April, and May, we've seen significant decreases in our ridership. Now, as initial fears of COVID-19 have subsided, we are seeing a leveling out of our ridership for the month of June. But what we wanted to do was to see what our ridership looked like compared to this time last year. Now, you may see 45% decreases or 51% decreases in our ridership, but overall, if you look at other transit agencies, even in the state, specifically in the region, you'll see upwards of maybe 70, 80 to even 90% decreases in some of the ridership. So comparatively, we're actually still holding steady with our ridership in the area. So that is a bit of good news in terms of what our future looks like and our future outlook looks like dealing with COVID-19. And I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dorian. Are there any quick questions for Dorian on Valley Metro? Hearing none, I will move on to the Regional Commission and Rachel.
Does Radar have comments?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. This is Nathan Sanford at Radar. If someone would let me know if you could hear me, I'd appreciate it.
Can't hear you.
Okay, great. So you're going to hear very similar things as to what you just heard from Dorian at Valley Metro in terms of what is going on to our services here in the Valley and beyond. First of all, once the pandemic hit, we had to implement a number of service and safety issues. So if you go to the next slide, just so you know, we're a coordinated system. We run lots of different services, mostly contract services with various agencies throughout the area. As soon as the schools shut down, the TAP Head Start shuttles stopped running. Ferrum closed, so we stopped running our deviated fixed route service that operates there. We run a service called the Maury Express. It's not in this containment area. It's up in Lexington and Rockbridge County. But it's just an example of some of the closures we've had to experience because the entire workforce there was afraid of catching the virus and they didn't want to work anymore. Then, of course, demand drops because there's fear of the virus. There's recommendations that we only provide essential trips, and a lot of places are simply closed. And then, of course, we require certain distancing on the vehicles, so that's going to prevent the number of people that can actually get transported at any one time. Some safety impacts, of course, personal protective equipment. Everybody knows about PPE now. So that's been provided for frontline staff or operators, dispatchers, and maintenance folks. Includes gloves, masks, and face shields. An increase in the cleaning supplies and the cleaning protocols on all of the vehicles. We have refocused some of our efforts from the outside of the vehicles and cleaning them to the inside. We were able to eventually secure enough masks that now we have them for not only the operators, but the clients as well if they don't have them. And we are in the process of getting operator barriers installed on our vehicles that will, again, prevent as much transmission. Just like Valley Metro, we've had some ridership impacts. This next slide will show you what a typical year looks like for us. This was fiscal year 19. With the number of trips per month, we do see a dip over the summer because we don't run the TAP Head Start shuttle and there's some other service changes. But in general, we're always providing this number of trips within a given range. But if you go to the next slide for fiscal year 20, you see we stay in that normal range until, of course, the pandemic hits. And then we have the steep drop-offs in April and May. Next slide, please. We did also receive some additional funding concerns that are helping us last this out because, of course, with decreased demand, we don't have as much work for everybody who's employed here to do. So just a couple of these pieces, we did receive some emergency operating assistance from Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. This amounted to about a month's worth of normal operating expenses, and this was rolled over from a previous year. We did, of course, like most everyone else, we have payroll tax credits that we can use through the Families First Coronavirus Response Act for any employees that do have to take time off related to the virus. And we did have to use that a little bit just to deal with some clients that ended up testing positive. We did secure a Paycheck Protection Program loan so that we were able to keep some folks employed and with a paycheck even when they didn't have any work to do. And we're on track to be able to have that completely forgiven. And that's helping us with payroll, utilities, health insurance premiums. And then just like Valley Metro, we received funding from the CARES Act. It was more like 1.2 million. And that's for our rural programs. And it's going to help us with keeping them operating and paying for pandemic related non-operating expenses like supplies, equipment, any COVID related labor, and then paid administrative leave, which is huge for us so that we can keep our folks on the books and they're ready to roll once we go back to more normal levels of service. One good point about that funding is it's all 100% federal. A lot of our rural programs have to require a state and local match. So for the next year or two, our rural programs will not be paying any local match, which is a nice feature. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are actually going to ask Rachel to postpone until the next TPO meeting. Rachel, I don't want to cut you short, and I don't want to only leave you 1 or 2 minutes. So if you don't mind, we'll put that off until the next meeting.
That's not a problem.
Thanks, Rachel. We are at the end of our agenda. Before we go to item number 10, comment period for policy board members, I do just want to again say thank you to everyone. I particularly want to thank Wayne and his entire staff for the assistance they have given me over the last couple of years and really for the 5 years I've been on the TPO. I think the work the TPO does is incredibly important. And I think it's also underrated. I don't think most people realize how important the work we do is. And so I'm happy that we have strong leadership coming into the TPO, and I urge you all to encourage the members from your localities, the TPO members from your localities, to participate, to learn what's going on with the TPO, and to be involved, because it is incredibly important. So Wayne, thank you. I'd like to thank the rest of the staff. I'd particularly like to wish good luck to Jackie and to Jane Johnson. At this point, I'll take other comments from policy board members and or the public.
I would just like to echo what you just said, Janet. Again, thanks to everybody for doing such an amazing job working together. When I first started as a city councilwoman a long, long time ago, I was really wanting to change the perception of Salem being an island, and join this body to prove that we are not, and that we wanted to work with the other localities, and everyone else agreed that that was the direction we wanted to take as a city. And I'm really glad for that and for the opportunity. And I'll continue to encourage the newly electeds to get involved and stay involved with all of you. So thanks for being so great to work with Wayne and Jackie and everyone else there. And Wayne, I'll have more time for golf now, just so you know.
All right, thank you, Jane. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to, on behalf of Roanoke County, thank both of you for your service to the TPO as well as your local governments. Enjoyed working with both of you, and we'll miss you and your experience. I would also like to echo the same kudos to Jackie Pace. I didn't know you were retiring so soon, and I thought I worked a long time, 39 years in my previous career, but someone else worked longer. So congratulations to you, and you're probably going to call Wayne up in about a couple of months and say, is there anything I can do to help you? Because if you don't do that, then you've got a good plan to stay busy and enjoy your retirement and be healthy. Thank you.
Mr. North. Thank everyone.
All right, since Billy's not here, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.